The air in the flooded basement of condemned house hung thick and stagnant, a miasma of mildew and forgotten things. Water, dark and still as crude oil, lapped at my ankles, reflecting the anemic glow of my flashlight. My colleague, a burly figure whose patience was as thin as his receding hairline, shifted restlessly by the entrance, his breath pluming in the chill. "UserFH, are we done here? There's nothing but old newspapers and water damage," he grumbled, his voice echoing off the damp concrete walls. "Patience," I murmured, my gaze fixed on a section of the waterlogged wall. It wasn't the water itself, nor the peeling paint that held my attention. It was the faint discoloration, a spiderweb of hairline fractures barely visible beneath the grime, just above the waterline. Everyone else had dismissed it as structural decay. I saw something else. The fractures weren't random. They formed a distinct pattern, almost like a deliberate etching, disguised by years of neglect. "This isn't decay," I said, more to myself than to my colleague. "This is a message or a map." A sharp buzz from my pocket interrupted my focus. My personal line. I pulled out my phone, the screen a brief, unwelcome beacon in the gloom. The caller ID flashed, the chief. That rarely meant good news and never meant a quiet afternoon. "UserFH," the chief's voice boomed, cutting through the static of the basement. "Drop everything. I've got a situation. Elias Thorne, he's dead." My colleague's head snapped towards me, his earlier impatience forgotten, replaced by a flicker of surprise. The name itself conjured images of impenetrable walls and an even more impenetrable personality. A recluse, a collector of the highest order and notoriously paranoid. "Thorne," I repeated, standing slowly, my eyes still scanning the strange markings on the basement wall. The world shifted. One moment I was unraveling a forgotten secret in a waterlogged ruin. The next I was being pulled into the orbit of a man who lived a life deliberately hidden from view. Details. At his mansion, apparent robbery, missing locket, no forced entry, the chief rattled off, a barely contained urgency in his tone. "Looks like an inside job, but the security. It's a fortress. Get over there, now." I nodded, pocketing my phone. "Looks like our little puzzle here will have to wait," I told my colleague, already heading for the narrow stairs. Thorne's mansion, a murder, no forced entry, a missing artifact. A lark-true mystery then, he ventured, following close behind me. Or something far more convoluted, I countered, my mind already racing, sifting through the sparse details. Elias Thorne didn't just have security, he was security. For someone to get into his heavily guarded sanctuary, to kill him, and to take something from his vault without a trace. It immediately pricked at my instincts. The obvious story, the robbery gone wrong, felt too neat, too conveniently packaged. The mansion loomed, a monolithic testament to wealth and isolation, its stone facade grim beneath the overcast sky. A small contingent of official vehicles already cluttered the expansive drive, their flashing lights casting an anemic pulse against the ornate iron gates. A junior officer waved me through, his expression tight with an unfamiliar tension. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of expensive polish, and something metallic, something grim. The opulent foyer, with its soaring ceilings and marble floors, felt less like a home and more like a mausoleum. A senior investigator, his face etched with frustration, met me at the base of a grand staircase. "UserFH," he greeted, his voice low. "Glad Ira here. This is complicated." "So I heard," I replied, my gaze sweeping over the intricate details of the foyer, a priceless tapestry here, a gilded statue there. Each object a potential clue, each surface a potential witness. "Walk me through it." He gestured towards a heavy oak door to our left. Thorne was found in his study. His personal assistant, the one who found him, is being interviewed now. Name's Renard. Been with Thorne for years. He was found him this morning unresponsive. We entered the study. The room was vast, lined with shelves of ancient tomes and dominated by a massive mahogany desk. Elias Thorne lay sprawled across a Persian rug near the hearth. His eyes were wide, fixed on the ceiling, a silent scream frozen on his features. There was no visible blood, no obvious wound. My eyes immediately went to his hands, clenched but not in a struggle, more like a sudden, involuntary spasm. Cause of death isn't immediately apparent, the senior investigator stated, echoing my own observation. No struggle, no signs of forced entry anywhere in the house. And the vault, he pointed to a section of the wall, concealed behind a sliding panel disguised as a bookshelf. The panel was open, revealing a heavy steel door now ajar. It was opened without force. No drill marks, no pry marks, nothing. I approached the vault, my eyes tracing the intricate locking mechanism. It was state-of-the-art, designed to withstand a siege. Yet it stood open, like a welcoming mouth. I peered inside, empty. A Renaissance era piece, priceless by all accounts. Thorne kept it locked in there. Only he and Renard knew the combination, supposedly. The senior investigator sighed, running a hand over his tired face. Renard claims he hasn't touched the vault in weeks, says he doesn't even remember the combination anymore, that Thorne changed it frequently and never shared it. My gaze lingered on Thorne's body, then moved to the vault, then back again. My mind began its work, connecting the dots that weren't yet there. The lack of struggle, the absence of forced entry, the pristine state of the room, the strategically opened vault. It all screamed artifice. No panicked thief left a scene this tidy. No desperate killer left a victim without a visible mark, especially not when a priceless object was stolen. A simple robbery gone wrong. I mused aloud, more a challenge to myself than a question to my colleague. I don't think so. This feels staged. The missing locket, the open vault, the lack of a struggle, it's all designed to point us in one direction, isn't it? The senior investigator looked at me, a flicker of something akin to relief in his eyes. I see it too. I knelt beside Thorne, not touching him, but observing every minute detail. His clothing was expensive, immaculate. A faint scent, something sweet and herbal, lingered in the air around him, clashing oddly with the metallic tang of death. His right hand was curled, almost protectively, around an ornate silver letter opener lying on the rug. But his grip was loose, the object not clutched, but merely resting there. My eyes narrowed. Why would a man dying suddenly, presumably of an unknown cause, be holding a letter opener? It wasn't a weapon. It wasn't a comfort. It was out of place. The tension in the room, which had been a low hum, now tightened into a knot. This wasn't a robbery. This was a message. And I had a feeling Elias Thorne had known his killer. I knelt beside Thorne, not touching him, but observing every minute detail. His right hand was curled, almost protectively, around an ornate, tarnished silver key, unlike any I'd seen on his large, modern keyring. It was heavy, old-fashioned, with intricate scrollwork on its head. A strange detail, given the high-tech security surrounding the collector. This wasn't the kind of key one used for a digital vault or a laser grid door. This was something else entirely. The initial sweep of Thorne's mansion was chaotic, a flurry of activity that slowly settled into organized forensic work. Once the body was removed and the immediate evidence secured, I retreated to Thorne's study, a room filled with more books than comfort, to begin the process of untangling the threads. The missing Renaissance-era locket was the obvious motive, but the lack of forced entry gnawed at me. Someone had been let in or already had access. My first interview was with Thorne's estranged niece. She sat across from me, perched on the edge of a velvet armchair, her posture rigid, her expensive silk scarf a splash of vibrant color in the summer room. Her eyes, however, were dry. Uncle Elias was difficult, she began, a practiced sigh escaping her lips. We hadn't spoken in years. He cut me off completely after I pursued art history instead of law. And yet you're listed as his sole living relative, I pointed out, my gaze steady. A significant inheritance awaits. She bristled slightly. I suppose, but I want nothing to do with it, not if it means dealing with his legacy. I was at the opening of the new gallery downtown last night, until midnight. Plenty of witnesses can confirm. Her alibi was solid, backed by a guest list and several prominent names. Too solid, perhaps. The man was a tyrant, UserFH, but even I wouldn't wish this upon him. Though honestly, I'm surprised it didn't happen sooner, given how many enemies he cultivated. Enemies, I prompted, leaning forward slightly. She waved a dismissive hand. Everyone. He bought out rivals, insulted artists, drove away anyone who dared to question his taste. He even had a peculiar fascination with old lockets. Said one in particular held a family secret. Obsessed he was. She frowned. He used to tell me stories about it when I was a girl, before he became completely insufferable. This last detail caught my attention. If they were truly estranged for years, how would she know about Thorne's continued peculiar fascination with the locket, or the family secret he associated with it? It was a subtle crack in her carefully constructed facade of indifference. Next was Thorne's personal assistant, a weary-looking individual with tired eyes and a perpetually harried expression. They had served Thorne for over 2 decades. He was a demanding master, they admitted, wringing their hands. Paranoid, reclusive. He trusted no one, not even me. I was simply a cog in his machine, running errands, managing his bizarre collections, making sure his security was impenetrable. Their voice was flat, devoid of emotion. You spent a great deal of time with him, I noted. Did he have any particular routines yesterday evening? He always had his evening tea. The assistant replied, almost robotically. A blend of rare herbs, specially prepared. I make it myself. He insisted. I was home, preparing his tea actually between 7 and 9, waiting for his call which never came. They described the process in meticulous detail, down to the specific temperature of the water and the precise steeping time. The aroma is quite distinctive, sweet and herbal, just as he liked it. The scent, the one I'd noticed around Thorne's body. But Thorne hadn't had his tea. His cold hands, the rigor mortis, all indicated a death hours before the assistant claimed to be preparing it. And if the tea was so distinctive, how could the scent linger on Thorne if he hadn't consumed it? And why would the assistant prepare it if Thorne wasn't there to drink it? Another thread, snagged. The assistant also mentioned, without prompting, that Thorne had been particularly agitated about the locket recently, believing someone was trying to acquire it. He kept it in the vault, of course, but he'd bring it out sometimes just to look at it. He was obsessed with its history, its supposed connection to a forgotten lineage. Finally, the head of security, a hulking figure with a square jaw and an air of professional competence that now seemed utterly shattered. UserFH, this place is a fortress, they insisted, gesturing around the control room, a wall of monitors displaying various angles of the mansion. Laser grids, pressure plates, motion sensors, biometrics. No one gets in without my knowledge. No one. Their voice was tight with suppressed fury or perhaps fear. I was in here monitoring everything, from 6 p.m. until I was called to the scene this morning. And yet, I said, Thorne is dead and a priceless artifact is missing, with no signs of forced entry. The security chief's jaw clenched. There was a brief glitch, sir, around 8:15 p.m. A power fluctuation in the main grid knocked out a few exterior cameras for precisely 3 minutes, 27 seconds. Routine, really. Happens sometimes with old wiring in this district. Nothing to worry about. The internal systems remained fully operational. If someone had breached the perimeter, I would have known. They pointed to a screen displaying a log of minor system alerts. See, cleared itself right up. 3 minutes, 27 seconds. A narrow window, but a window nonetheless, and the security chief seemed too eager to dismiss it as routine. Old wiring in a district known for its cutting-edge infrastructure. Thorne paid top dollar for everything. A power fluctuation that conveniently affected only exterior cameras, and only for a precise duration. It felt like a carefully rehearsed explanation. I noted the specific camera they pointed to, the one covering the rear service entrance, a less used part of the estate. The interviews concluded, leaving me with a collection of seemingly airtight alibis, each with a subtle tear in its fabric. The niece knew too much, the assistant's timeline felt off, and the security chief's glitch was too neat. But it was the old, tarnished key in Thorne's hand that kept pulling at my thoughts. It didn't belong with the high-tech, impenetrable fortress Thorne had built. I spent the next few hours poring over old blueprints, property deeds, and historical maps of the estate, cross-referencing them with Thorne's known acquisitions. My eyes finally landed on an overlooked detail, an adjacent, derelict parcel of land, listed simply as Thorne Ancillary Property Unmaintained. It was a condemned house, long forgotten, on the very edge of Thorne's sprawling estate. No one had mentioned it. The evening had deepened into a chill, starless night by the time I arrived. The gate was rusted shut, but a gap in the crumbling stone wall allowed me passage. The air grew heavy with the scent of stagnant water and decaying wood. The condemned house loomed, a skeletal silhouette against the bruised sky. The descent was treacherous. The wooden steps groaned under my weight, some giving way entirely. The air grew heavier, thick with the smell of mildew and earth. My boots splashed into icy water as I reached the bottom, the flooded basement of condemned house. The walls were slick with algae, and ancient pipes wept rust. This was not a place for the living. I scanned the perimeter, the flashlight sweeping across the damp stone. Most of the walls were featureless, but one section behind what looked like a collapsed coal chute seemed different. The masonry was too uniform, too neatly cut for the rest of the rough-hewn basement. I ran my gloved hand over the stone, feeling for an irregularity. There, and then a small, circular indentation. My hand went to my pocket, retrieving the tarnished silver key from Thorne's hand. It was a perfect fit. The air within was stale, undisturbed for decades. A hidden passage, known only to a select few, perhaps only to Thorne himself, and now to me. The intricate web of deceit just got a whole lot more tangled. The security chief's insistence on a routine power fluctuation kept gnawing at me. Routine in a house where every circuit hummed with the precision of a Swiss watch. I decided to revisit the mansion's nerve center, the server room, before the forensics crew packed up their last kit. The air in there still held the stale scent of ozone and cooling electronics, a stark contrast to the opulence of the main house. I moved slowly, my gaze sweeping over the racks of blinking lights, the tangled skein of cables. The initial sweep had been thorough, but my gut told me there was a seam, a loose thread. I ran my gloved hand along the base of the server racks, feeling for anything out of place. Most of the floor tiles were flush, cold, immovable. But then near the back wall, behind a particularly humming server, my fingers brushed against a slight give. A tile just barely loose. I knelt, inserting a pry tool into the narrow gap. With a soft click, the tile lifted. Inside, nestled amongst a dust bunny the size of a small rodent, lay a tarnished silver button. It wasn't just any button. It was intricately engraved, a miniature crest depicting a coiled serpent around a stylized, broken shield. My mind immediately went to the recently dismissed personal assistant, a young woman from an old, if somewhat faded, aristocratic family. That serpent crest, I recalled from my preliminary research, was a prominent feature of her family's heraldry. Well, well, I murmured, carefully plucking the button out with tweezers and dropping it into an evidence bag. This was too neat, too perfectly placed. A clear, undeniable clue pointing directly at a suspect with motive and opportunity. And that, I've learned, is precisely when I should be most suspicious. My interview with the former personal assistant was, as expected, a tense affair. He was composed, almost brittle, her eyes darting between me and the evidence bag on the table. This was found at the scene, I stated, pushing the bag across. Do you recognize it? She picked it up, her fingers tracing the serpentine engraving. A flicker of something recognition, alarm, crossed her face before she regained her composure. It's similar to my family's crest, yes, but it's not one of ours. The shield is wrong and the serpent's head. It's a different angle. She paused, then added, these are mass-produced, tourist trinkets. They sell them in the old quarter, trying to cash in on the historical societies. My brow furrowed. Mass-produced. I took the button back, examining it under a small magnifying glass. The engraving, which at first glance appeared hand-wrought, now showed faint, uniform lines, the telltale sign of a machine press. And he was right about the crest. The broken shield was an artistic liberty, not the precise, unbroken symbol I'd seen in the family's official records. A clever forgery, designed to look unique, to point a finger, but ultimately a dead end. Someone wanted me to look at her, and they'd gone to some trouble to make it convincing. Thank you for your time, I said, already mentally discarding the button as primary evidence. The red herring had been neatly laid, and I'd nearly swallowed it whole. This meant Thorne's killer was not only cunning, but also had a sophisticated understanding of misdirection. Frustrated, I shifted gears. The obvious lead had evaporated. It was time to dig into Thorne's past, beyond the immediate circle of suspects. I needed to understand the man, not just the victim. I made a call to an old contact, a retired art historian who had known Thorne for decades, albeit from a distance. We agreed to meet at a quiet cafe. Elias was a complex man, the historian began, stirring his tea. Brilliant, yes, but driven by obsession and paranoia. He made many enemies in his ascent, accusations of dubious provenance, outbidding rivals with cutthroat tactics, a reputation for acquiring pieces through unconventional means. Unconventional how? I pressed. He leaned in, his voice dropping. There was a society, you see, the Keepers of the Forgotten. Thorne was an early member, dedicated to preserving art, they said. But it was more about acquiring it, keeping it out of public hands, often through less than legal channels. They had their own rituals, their own code. Thorne left them years ago after a falling out, but he still held onto some of their secrets, and their methods, I suspect. Do you know where they met? I asked, my mind racing. A secret society. Another layer to Thorne's life. The historian hesitated. Not often. But I remember Elias once mentioning an old rendezvous point, a place they'd use when they wanted absolute discretion. A condemned house near the old docks. Said it was perfect because no one would ever think to look there. A flooded basement, he specifically mentioned, for storing certain sensitive documents. The image of a flooded basement of condemned house immediately conjured a vivid, unsettling picture. It wasn't the kind of place one simply stumbled upon. This was a deliberate choice, an intentional hiding spot. I thanked the historian and made my way to the address he provided. The condemned house stood like a skeletal sentinel against the grey sky, its windows boarded up, paint peeling in long, curling strips. A tattered no trespassing sign flapped forlornly from a rotting porch post. The air here was heavy with the smell of decay and damp earth. I slipped past a loose board, my flashlight beam cutting through the oppressive gloom of the interior. The floorboards groaned under my weight, protesting my intrusion. I found the basement access in the kitchen, a heavy wooden door swollen with moisture. It took considerable effort to force it open. A putrid smell, thick with mildew and stagnant water, immediately assaulted my senses. My flashlight beam danced down the rickety steps, revealing a scene of utter desolation. The basement was indeed flooded, a murky, black expanse of water stretching from wall to wall, reflecting the wavering light like a shattered mirror. Debris, splintered wood, rusted metal, sodden furniture floated just beneath the surface or lay submerged in the opaque depths. Anything Thorne or his society might have hidden here would be long gone, destroyed by time and water. The thought was infuriating. Another lead washed away. As I climbed back out, wiping grime from my gloves, my phone buzzed. It was a colleague from the Art Theft Division. UserFH, I know you're busy, but we've got a strange one, the colleague said, his voice tight. Minor theft at the Bellwether Gallery. A small bronze figurine, historically significant but not high value. And the weirdest thing, the gallery owner swears there was a brief power flicker, maybe 10 seconds, just before it happened. Security footage shows a blank screen for that exact duration. My mind snapped back to Thorne's mansion, the security chief's too eager dismissal of a routine power fluctuation. A minor theft, a power flicker, seemingly unconnected. The game was getting more complicated, and the players were far more resourceful than I'd initially imagined. A routine power fluctuation, the security chief had said, his words still echoing in my mind, too smooth, too practiced. And the minor theft, a few dusty ledgers, some obscure metal components from a forgotten storage closet. He'd waved it off like a house cat batting at a dust bunny. But my gut, that persistent, gnawing instinct, told me otherwise. Nothing about Elias Thorne's death or his life was routine. I'd spent the last few hours poring over old property records, digging into Thorne's less publicized acquisitions. He was a collector, yes, but not just of art. He collected secrets, it seemed, and forgotten places. One address kept snagging my attention, a property Thorne had acquired decades ago, then seemingly abandoned. A condemned structure on the city's outskirts, far from his opulent mansion, a place that didn't fit the profile of his meticulously curated life. Why hold on to it? Why let it decay? The address led me to a street choked with weeds, past boarded-up windows and peeling paint. The air grew heavy with the scent of mildew and decay as I approached the designated structure. It was a skeletal outline against the overcast sky, a monument to neglect. The front door hung askew on a single hinge, a gaping, more inviting ruin. I pushed it open further, the groan of protesting wood echoing in the oppressive silence. Inside, the house was a wreck of fallen plaster and splintered floorboards. My flashlight beam cut through the gloom, illuminating cobweb-draped furniture draped in ghostly white sheets like forgotten specters. But it was the chill that truly struck me, a damp, penetrating cold that spoke of stagnant water. I found the basement door, a heavy slab of warped oak, and pried it open. A wave of musty, metallic air washed over me, thick and cloying. The steps down were treacherous, slick with slime and grit. My beam danced across the scene below, confirming my suspicion. This was the flooded basement of condemned house. The water level was high, reaching my shins, a murky, opaque surface reflecting the weak light from above. The walls were weeping, streaked with mineral deposits, and the air hung heavy with the smell of damp earth and rust. I moved slowly, deliberately, my boots sloshing through the frigid water. The floor was uneven, littered with what felt like discarded pipes and crumbling bricks. My light found a workbench, surprisingly intact, against the far wall. It was old, scarred wood, but unlike the rest of the basement, it hadn't completely succumbed to the elements. On its surface, half submerged in the water, lay a collection of peculiar tools. Not carpentry tools nor plumbing. These were delicate, almost surgical in their precision. Tiny chisels, a jeweler's loop, and a series of unusual clamps. And then I saw it, nestled amongst the tools, half hidden by a thin layer of silt. A small, tarnished brass plate, no larger than my palm, with an intricate, almost microscopic engraving. I carefully lifted the plate, shaking off the gritty water. The engraving was a series of interlocking symbols, geometric patterns that seemed to shift and dance in my light. It was beautiful, but also strangely familiar. Where had I seen something like this before? My mind raced, sifting through the countless details of Thorne's mansion, his vault, the locket. The locket. The pattern on the brass plate was an exact match for a tiny, almost imperceptible etching on the back of the missing Renaissance-era locket. An etching I'd dismissed as a decorative flourish, an artist's signature. But now, holding this brass plate, I knew it was more. It was a key, or, more accurately, a cipher. I scanned the workbench again, my heart beginning to thump a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Underneath a loose floorboard, pried open with some difficulty, I found a small, watertight container. Inside, sealed against the damp, were old documents. Yellowed parchment, faded ink. I carefully unrolled the top sheet. It was a detailed diagram, a schematic for a complex mechanical device, and nestled within its intricate lines were the very symbols from the brass plate and the locket. But there was more. The document referred to a convergence point and a temporal alignment. And then, a name. A name I recognized from Thorne's past, an old business partner, a man who had vanished years ago after a bitter falling out, rumored to involve a significant financial betrayal on Thorne's part. The documents hinted at a shared project, a secret endeavor, something far grander and more dangerous than any art collection. The locket wasn't just a piece of jewelry, it was a component, a crucial element in this forgotten scheme. And then it clicked. The minor theft. The security chief had mentioned some old, specialized calibrators and a series of unique, small metal rods taken from Thorne's archive. At the time, they sounded like junk, easily dismissed. But now, looking at the schematics, I understood. Those calibrators and metal rods weren't junk. They were the missing pieces to this puzzle, the very tools needed to operate or complete the device detailed in these documents. Thorne wasn't just murdered for his locket. He was murdered because the locket was a key, and the killer needed it, along with those seemingly insignificant minor theft items, to unlock something far greater. Something Thorne had kept hidden, perhaps even from himself, in this forgotten, decaying basement. The locket's monetary value was a smokescreen. The true prize was what it represented, what it unlocked. It wasn't a simple art heist. It was a retrieval, a reclamation. The killer wasn't just taking something, they were completing something, perhaps even correcting a past injustice. Thorne's betrayal, detailed in these very documents, was the catalyst. The old business partner, the one who vanished, the one Thorne had wronged. He would know about this basement, about the locket's true purpose, about the minor components. He would be the one to orchestrate such an elaborate, deeply personal revenge. I had found the heart of the mystery, but it was beating with a pulse of forgotten grievances and dangerous ambition. The game wasn't just getting complicated, it was getting deadly. And I was standing in the middle of a killer's unfinished legacy. The brass plate felt heavy in my palm, the intricate pattern a mirror image of the faint etching on the missing locket. Not just an artist's flourish, I'd thought. A key. But a key to what? My mind raced, sifting through every detail of Thorne's life, his obsessions, his paranoia. He didn't just collect art, he collected secrets, especially those concerning the whispered society. I remembered a peculiar notation in one of Thorne's more obscure journals, a series of archaic symbols accompanying a faded map fragment tucked away in a volume on forgotten local histories. At the time, I dismissed it as another one of his eccentricities, perhaps a planned treasure hunt for a future acquisition. But now, the symbols on the brass plate clicked into place. They weren't a key for a lock, but a cipher for a location. A location Thorne had once owned, then neglected, letting it fall into disrepair. A place he'd mentioned only once, with a dismissive wave, as the old place down by the creek, not worth the taxes. A condemned house. The drive was short, but felt interminable, the rain beginning to fall in earnest, blurring the winding country roads. My headlights cut through the gloom, finally illuminating a derelict structure silhouetted against the bruised sky. It was a skeletal edifice of rotting timber and crumbling brick, ivy clawing its way up the walls like skeletal fingers. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and decay. I pushed open the groaning front door, the sound echoing through the empty shell of the house. Inside, it was a tomb of silence, save for the drip, drip, drip of water somewhere deep within. The floorboards groaned beneath my weight as I moved towards the source of the dripping, a faint shimmer of reflected light from below. A set of rickety stairs, barely clinging to the wall, led downwards. Each step creaked a protest, threatening to give way. My beam finally settled on what lay beneath, the flooded basement of condemned house. The water level was perhaps a foot deep, obscuring whatever lay on the actual floor. The walls were slick with algae and mold, dripping relentlessly. It was a place designed to be forgotten, to conceal. And then I saw him. A figure stood almost perfectly still in the middle of the flooded basement of condemned house, his back to me, silhouetted against a sliver of light filtering through a high, grimy window. It was Thorne's archivist, the quiet, unassuming man who had spent decades cataloging Thorne's vast, chaotic collection of historical documents and curiosities. He was holding something, his movements slow, deliberate. "I knew you'd come," the archivist said, his voice surprisingly calm, devoid of surprise, as if he'd been expecting me all along. He turned, and in his hand I saw it the Renaissance era locket, glinting dully even in the dim light. He held it almost reverently, his thumb tracing the intricate pattern on its surface. "The locket," I stated, my voice steady despite the tremor that ran through me. "And the brass plate, you knew what they were." He smiled, a humorless, almost wistful expression. "More than you could ever imagine, UserFH. This isn't just a locket, it's a key and a legacy." He gestured around the waterlogged basement with his free hand. This place, it was never just the old place. It was the original meeting house. Before Thorne's family built their mansion, before they rose to prominence, this was where the society gathered, where the truth was kept. "The truth about what?" I pressed, my gaze fixed on the locket, trying to discern his next move. The water around his feet rippled slightly with his movements. "About what Thorne stole," he replied, his voice hardening, a flicker of something ancient and bitter entering his eyes. "My family's legacy. My great-great-grandfather was the keeper of the locket, the society's true archivist. Thorne's ancestor, a ruthless opportunist, betrayed him, took the locket, and with it control of the society's influence. My ancestor was disgraced, his name erased. This locket, it was a symbol of that betrayal, a symbol of power usurped. He paused, looking down at the locket. Thorne found out eventually. He had a way of digging up unpleasant histories. He knew my lineage, knew what this locket truly represented. He kept it, not just for its beauty, but as a twisted trophy, a constant reminder of his family's dominance over mine. His paranoia wasn't just about protecting his art, it was about protecting his stolen history. The locket's pattern. It wasn't just an etching. It was a hidden mechanism. You knew how to disarm his vault, how to bypass his defenses, because you knew the secret of the locket, a secret passed down through your family. You were part of his inner circle, privy to his research, his obsessions. He was an old man, UserFH, consumed by his own fear and greed, the archivist said, his eyes now blazing with a quiet intensity. He held on to a lie for too long. Justice demanded it. It's more than just gold and jewels. It contains a parchment, a list of names, a blueprint for the society's true purpose, hidden away for generations, my family's purpose. I spent decades in his service, waiting, learning, gathering what was rightfully ours. He trusted me with his archives, never realizing I was simply reclaiming mine. He raised the locket slightly, the faint light catching its surface. I merely accelerated the inevitable. He would have died clinging to his stolen legacy. I merely ensured it returned to its rightful owner, to me. And the brass plate? I asked, trying to keep him talking, buying myself time to observe, to plan. The water around him was still, but I noticed a slight discoloration near his left foot, a subtle ripple that didn't quite match the ambient stillness. A key, he confirmed, to open the locket's hidden compartment. Thorne never figured that out. He only saw it as another pretty bauble, but I knew, I always knew. He took a slow step forward, the water churning around his ankles. Now, UserFH, you have a choice. You can walk away, let history correct itself. Or you can interfere and become another casualty of a past you don't understand. He moved deliberately, his hands subtly shifting, the locket now held like a weapon. My eyes darted to the discolored ripple in the water again. It wasn't just discoloration. It was a faint, almost invisible wire, snaking just beneath the surface, connecting to something larger, heavier, submerged. A trap. He was guiding me towards it. "You're right," I answered, taking a calculated step back, away from the wire, towards a slightly raised, drier section of the concrete wall. "I don't understand the full scope of your family's history or Thorne's betrayals, but I understand murder." My mind raced. He wasn't going to attack me directly with the locket. He was going for something else, something hidden, a weapon. As he reached for it, his foot slid on the slick, algae-covered concrete beneath the water. He lost his balance, a sharp gasp escaping him as he stumbled forward, splashing heavily. The locket flew from his grasp, arcing through the air. My instincts took over. I dove, not for him, but for the glinting object. My hands slapped against the cold metal, closing around the locket just as it was about to disappear into the murky depths. My fingers tightened, securing the prize. I scrambled back, water dripping from my clothes, the locket clutched tightly in my fist. He pushed himself up, soaked and furious, his eyes burning with frustrated rage. "I fool, I have no idea what I've done." I stood, holding the locket aloft, its subtle weight a testament to the layers of history, betrayal, and obsession it contained. "Maybe not everything," I conceded, my breath coming in ragged gasps. "But I know enough, and now the locket is evidence." The locket felt heavier now, not just with its antique gold and sapphire weight, but with the full, crushing burden of Thorne's twisted legacy. My breath still hitched in my throat, but the fog of uncertainty had finally lifted. I understood. The true value of this piece wasn't its market price, but the truth it held, a truth Thorne had guarded with his life, and which ultimately had cost him it. I ran my thumb over the locket's smooth surface, feeling for the faint, almost imperceptible seam I'd noticed earlier, dismissed as an imperfection. Now, knowing what I knew, a different story unfolded. A story whispered in the intricate filigree, in the carefully concealed hinge that wasn't for opening, but for revealing. With a minute pressure, a nearly invisible catch gave way, and a sliver of parchment, brittle with age, slid from a tiny, hidden compartment. My eyes scanned the faded script, not a deed, not a will, but a coded ledger entry, a confession of sorts. detailing the illicit acquisition of wealth generations ago, implicating Thorne's ancestors in a monumental fraud that had ruined countless families. And among the names listed, buried deep in the past, was one that echoed in the present, a name tied directly to Thorne's most trusted aide, the one who had meticulously managed his paranoia, his security, his life. The aide, the quiet, ever-present shadow. They hadn't wanted the locket for its beauty or its value, but for the devastating secret it contained. They had tried to expose Thorne, to reclaim a sliver of justice for their own family's ruin, only to be met with Thorne's characteristic, violent refusal. The struggle, the panicked grab for the locket, the fatal push. It all clicked into place, a terrible, desperate act born of generations of quiet suffering. I knew where the aide would be. I'd seen the subtle tremor in their hands, the haunted look in their eyes when I'd questioned them about Thorne's past. I'd also remembered a fleeting comment about a distant, abandoned property, a place they'd inherited, a place they sometimes visited to clear their head. A place no one would ever think to look. A place where they might finally try to destroy the locket's damning contents, now that it was no longer in Thorne's vault. My car cut through the night, the city lights blurring behind me as I headed for the outskirts, towards the forgotten corner of the district. The GPS led me down crumbling asphalt, past skeletal trees, until a lone, decaying structure loomed in my headlights. The condemned house stood silhouetted against the pale moon, its windows like vacant eyes. A faint glow flickered from within, a single, desperate beacon. I parked a distance away, the gravel crunching under my boots as I approached the sagging porch. The front door hung askew, groaning in the breeze. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of damp earth and decay. I moved through the hollowed-out rooms, my flashlight beam dancing over peeling wallpaper and splintered floorboards. The glow was stronger now, coming from below. I found the stairs leading down to the flooded basement of condemned house. The steps were treacherous, slick with moss and standing water. The water here was deep, reaching above my ankles, reflecting the single, struggling lantern held by the figure hunched over a makeshift table. They looked up, their face illuminated by the flickering light, eyes wide with a mixture of recognition and despair. In their hands, I saw a small, ornate silver box, the kind used for burning incense or old papers. They had been about to destroy the parchment. "I know," I responded, my voice echoing unnaturally in the vast, damp space. The tension in the air was palpable, thick like the stagnant water around us. "I know about the locket, and I know about my family." Their shoulders sagged. Thorne, he was a monster, UserFH. He built his empire on lies, on the ruin of others, my family among them. I stepped closer, the water swirling around my boots. "You tried to expose him, to use the locket." He laughed, the aide spat, a flicker of rage in their eyes. He added no one would believe me. He tried to take it back, to burn it. We struggled, he fell. It was an accident, UserFH, a terrible, desperate accident. Their voice cracked, the confession tearing through them. I just wanted justice. After all these years, I just wanted someone to know what he truly was. I held up the locket, the tiny parchment still nestled within its hidden cavity. "This is the proof, not just of the art, but of everything else. It will be heard." The aide looked at the locket, then at me, and a profound weariness settled over their features. The fight had drained out of them, replaced by a haunting resignation. They slowly placed the silver box down, their hands trembling. The rest was a blur of flashing lights, official statements, and endless paperwork. The aide was taken into custody, their confession meticulously recorded. The locket, with its ancient secret, became the centerpiece of the investigation, not merely as a stolen artifact, but as the key to a century-old injustice. In the days that followed, the story broke, sending shockwaves through the art world and beyond. Thorne's carefully constructed image crumbled, revealing the ruthless, avaricious man beneath. The locket, once a symbol of his obsession, became a testament to his downfall. I stood in my office, the case file closed, the final report signed. The locket wouldn't return to a private collection. Its historical significance, combined with its newfound role in exposing a generational wrong, meant it would find its place in a museum, perhaps even a national archive, where its story could be properly told. It was a complicated justice, born of desperation and tragedy, but justice nonetheless. I thought about Thorne, consumed by his paranoia and his secrets, and about his aide, driven by a quiet, simmering rage. Obsession, I realized, came in many forms. It could drive a man to hoard beauty, or another to seek vengeance. The lines between right and wrong, victim and perpetrator, often blurred under its relentless pressure. My job was to untangle those lines, to see beyond the obvious, and sometimes to find the truth hidden in the smallest, most beautiful things. And with this case, I felt I had done just that. The city slept, but the echoes of Thorne's past, finally brought to light, would resonate for a long, long time.